Welcome
to the Occasional Podcast, episode
4.
It's 4. We have a very special co-host today, Bryan Beasley, director, photographer,
Mr. Extraordinaire.
The Bryan Beasley is really how I should address him.
That's correct.
Hey,
folks. How are you? I'm just going to cut you off. Let's get right to it.
He's worked with many people and many musicians, and he's most known for his documentaries. Just to toot your own, doot doot. What musicians that the audience might relate to have you worked with?
I found myself, even though I wasn't a fan as a kid, being Mr. Heavy Metal. So, Alice Cooper. I guess Dave Grohl isn't technically heavy metal. Got to work with him, which was awesome because he is the friendliest man in rock and roll. Scott Ian and all of Anthrax, Metallica.
I heard a rumor that one time you were working with the Black Sabbath frontman, Ronnie James Dio, and that you called him Dido. Is that true?
Not to his face. But it almost came to that. The people that hired me, Revolver Magazine hired me to direct the cold opening to the Golden Gods. This was, I think, the first Golden Gods. And so I'd only seen the script. And again, I did not grow up listening to heavy metal. I was like Mr. Easy listening as a child. Kenny Rogers and Billy Joel. It was just, oh, yeah. I see the script, and they got Ronnie James Dio, and it was just Dio, D-I-O. And I literally read it, I was like, does he pronounce his name Dido? And the producer, Josh Bernstein's like, I'm not letting you on set. You are fired. And I was like, I never heard it. I only read his name, and I've never been able to live that down. So that always comes up that I'm just not very proficient when it comes to the heavy metal characters of the world.
And they are characters. I think one of the other kind of things that's always been said around those heavy metal shows is that they should be sponsored by Just for Men.
Oh, my gosh. That is... we were going to talk about NAMM, right? That is my one takeaway from NAMM. I'm going to get myself in trouble here. Is that every time we'd go up to I don't know, Vinnie Paul or somebody, and it would just be like, if you look really closely, their beards are Santa Claus white, like about a millimeter of it is Santa Claus white, and then it's just jet black. Just for Men black. Now, I used to be a Just for Men user. I'm not going. I'm proud. I actually
not just
love
the president.
That's right. I actually am a client, and I stopped using it because it's too much gray. I'm just an old man, and I've embraced it. But these heavy metalers,
they have an image to project.
They have an image, and that image is jet black when you're 69 years old.
So Bryan is also a vinyl enthusiast. He loves the sound of analog.
I do. Pops, cricks, snaps.
The whole nine. And we're heading into NAMM next week, right on the threshold of the National Association of Musicians Merchants. In case you didn't know what it was.
I actually didn't know.
Yeah, well, now you do. And it's not holistically an audiophile show as the show is oriented around, but there are a crossover from the pro side. So it's production, it's guitars, and a spackling, a shimmering, small droppings of audio companies, a lot of the in-ear companies, a couple of good DAC makers, analog to digital, digital to analog. That's kind of how it goes. And so we'll go there. We'll pull out the nit bits.
It's a great party. Go to the Hilton lobby.
Just hang out there?
That's all. Dude, some people never get badges. They literally only hang out at the Hilton lobby. And during the day, it's just meeting central in there. And then at night, that is the party. And then it moves up to the rooms.
And then what happens?
I don't know. I'm a married man. Never went up there.
But there's absolutely no drug use.
No. God, no.
And they only drink non-alcoholic beer.
That is correct.
And everybody's clothes always stays on.
That's correct. The one thing is the average age there is 62 years old. So.
And everybody's hair color is always the natural color.
Jet black, baby. Just for Men, jet black, like we were saying. When the Golden Gods, I think Golden Gods 3 or 4, they really got big. And Lemmy was in it. It was Lemmy, Dave Mustaine, and Chuck Billy. were kind of like our three metal masters that were sitting at a table. And I get there, and Lemmy, who lived at the Rainbow, was already there before anyone.
If you guys have seen the documentary, he literally just sits at the casino machine every day. That's
He
his
lived there.
life.
Yeah, Roman Cokes or Jack and Cokes. I forget which one it was, but they actually have a statue of him there now, so he lives there forever. But so yeah, he was there, of course, and I'll never forget. Josh Bernstein was the producer of the project, and a guy named Eric Lederman was the writer. And I go around to all the talent, hand them the script, and they'd already seen it. And he just turns to me, and I hand him the script, and he throws it on the ground and goes, "Who wrote this shit?" And I was like, "Well, I mean, the writer's here. You want me to bring him over and we can, talk about this?" And he goes, "Why would I fucking want to do that?" And I'll never forget. So this is how I met Lemmy. Like that was me meeting him. And I turned to my right, thinking that Josh, the producer, was standing next to me. And as soon as Lemmy had thrown the script down, Josh was like, "This is your job, Bees. I'm out of here," just leaving me in the dust. And so I kept, I tried to, play peacemaker. I was like, "Well, tell me what problems are with the script and let's talk about it." And he basically just grunted and griffed and walked away. And then his assistant came over and was like, "Don't worry about a thing. This is what he does. Like he'll do it." And I mean, he did read the lines begrudgingly. Actually, the best part about that was that Dave Mustaine took it very seriously. Thank God. And I think once Lemmy saw Dave Mustaine and Chuck Billy actually rehearsing the lines and understanding that this was going to be on national television, and these heavy metal guys never get that kind of exposure. I think Lemmy kind of was like, oh, this isn't it's silly what we're doing. It was totally absurd, but they actually he actually put in he actually got serious, and it turned out to be hilarious.
I'm just sitting here thinking about the names that you list off, and I'm realizing half the people are no longer with us.
Yeah. If you work with me, you're pretty much gonna.
It's like the kiss of death.
Yeah. Because Dio, he died less than a year after that, and I don't know. Lemmy made it. I worked with Lemmy a few times, and he made it. We got to work together at least 3 or 4 times before he croaked.
He was more resilient.
Yeah. I thought that guy was gonna outlive us all. All right. So who are we talking to today? Who'd you talk to today?
Andy Regan. Long time. He worked in New York. He's worked at some of the big New York audio shops. He's worked on the road. He currently works for HiFiMAN, and he's been in the industry. He's one of those iconic figures who's been around for the longest time, and he has friends, and he's worked with other people that have been around for a really long time as well. So I wanted to get some time with him. Did a stellar job, if you ask me. I hope I can edit it down to the most beautiful moments, because I felt like I was about to tear up at a couple of parts. So maybe you guys get that vibe.
You're a regular Barbara Walters. Gonna make him cry.
So I really hope you guys enjoy it, and let's roll this thing. Another one of the personalities that I've long awaited to get behind the microphone here, Andy Regan, Chief Marketing Officer of HiFiMAN. Thanks for joining us.
Okay, I'm glad to be here.
The man with the smoky voice. I like that. He's got a voice for radio. I really always enjoy hearing his story.
Well, people said for years I had a face for radio, so it was.
So, Andy, I always like to start off with just a baseline. Where are you from originally? Where were you born?
I grew up in Lower Manhattan in New York City, and when I was a teenager, we moved out to what we thought was the country. It was East Rutherford, New Jersey, which most people would not think is the country, but that's basically where I grew up.
And did you have anything initially that kind of drew you to audio? So here's the thing: is I've interviewed a bunch of people, and there's kind of 2 different schools of thought. Some people say most people fall into audio, as in it's not their first choice. Others have come out and said, this is all I've ever wanted to do, so forth. Which group would you say you fall into? Is it something that you always like you got a bug and I had to be involved, or was it something you're like, well, I kind of wanted to be this, kind of to be that, and now I do this?
Well, I kind of came at it from a different aspect. I grew up. I'm 64. I was born in 1953. So when I was in my early teenage years, I just completely fell in love with music, and I was listening. New York radio was a great place to listen, and I grew up on the Motown stuff and the AM radio. And then somewhere when I was 14 or 15, FM radio started. And, their thing was they played albums, and they played songs that were longer than 3 minutes. And I started to discover, Iron Butterfly and Muddy Waters and this, and it just blew my mind. And, it was 67, 68. I was kind of the burgeoning hippie, football player turned into a hippie. And when I was about a junior in high school, there used to be a concert hall in New York called the Fillmore East. And I used to go to the Fillmore East. It was crazy. It was $2 to sit in the balcony and $3 to sit downstairs. And Bill Graham at the Fillmore East was bringing artists in, like he'd have Ray Charles and the Grateful Dead on the same bill and stuff like that. So it just blew my mind. And so I set forth I wanted to play music. And I quickly found out I had literally no talent. So I wanted to be closer to the music. And through a series of begging and pleading and this and that and the other thing and hanging out at the stage door at the Fillmore, they gave me a job on stage.
Oh.
And I was just carrying stuff and stacking stuff and that kind of thing. But there's a couple people there that mentored me in the audio side of things, and I got really into it. So for me, it was first the music drew me in, and then the gear did too. Yeah. I was also fortunate in that after that, I went out on a David Bowie tour when I was 19 years old, the Spiders from Mars tour. And rock and roll was really pushing the audio industry because playing bigger and bigger venues. And I remember I went to Woodstock. Woodstock, if you looked at the PA at Woodstock, you wouldn't use it to fill a room with 300 people.
And I've heard that too, like in the Beatles stuff, where they're like the PAs were just garbage back in the day.
Well, the technology was not there, and so basically, I spent the next 15 years on the road with people like David Bowie and Willie Nelson and Waylon Jennings and Aerosmith and Fleetwood Mac. But the amazing thing was the technological push that went on between, say, 1975 and 1985, driven by the need to play big outdoor shows, bigger venues. So, for example, for something that maybe some people that aren't that audio literate can understand, is that I started out with using console boards to mix on that had bass and treble. And then in 5 years, we went from bass and treble to graphic EQ to parametric EQ in like 5 years. So the technological drive was crazy, and so was the music. The music was so amazingly, and there was so much of it back then. So I feel fortunate I grew up at that time period.
I've talked about this with some other people. Do you think that those two ideas are connected at all? That maybe the discovery of technology and that fresh canvas that they were painting had something to do with the fact that so much good music was produced during that time?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Artists wanted to push the envelope more and more, and they wanted to sound better, and they wanted to. When I used to not be on the road, I'd go work at the studios in New York, assisting the engineers or actually doing a little bit of engineering myself. But I worked at I worked on the third or fourth album that was recorded at Electric Ladyland, which was Jimi Hendrix's studio, and he had brought in these Israeli guys to like hand build the board because he wanted to push the envelope of what we can do. You know, when you look at what the Beatles did, some of the brilliance of what the Beatles did was they did it on four channels.
Yeah.
You know,
it was essentially live to tape, if I'm understanding correctly.
well, basically, but if you think about it, just the way they had to group things. I mean, now you're doing 48 channels. You can put everything gets its own channel. I mean, they had to do some amazing thing like grouping the background vocals with the drum mix and the, you know, but we went from that 4-channel kind of paradigm to like within 10 years having 48 channels and mixing in stereo. And like when I first went on the road, we mixed in mono.
Wow.
So yeah, it was pretty crazy. But like I said, I think I feel very fortunate to have been in that time period because it was such a renaissance. I mean, we went. I can remember Richard Eventide when I was on the Fleetwood Mac tour, bringing me the first Eventide digital delay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the reason he invented it was we did these large-scale outdoor shows with 500,000 people, and we had to have delay towers to match with the new format video.
Oh, so the lips would
Yeah.
sync.
So it wouldn't look like a bad Japanese Godzilla movie. And it was funny, nobody even thought of it till the first time they put up a big video screen, and you went, uh-oh, we have a problem here, you know? So everything was driven by that need, and some of the people I was fortunate to be around were these pioneers of the audio industry that just figured all this stuff out, like John Mayer from Meyer Sound in California, who did the Grateful Dead PA.
Yeah.
You know,
the Wall of Sound.
The
right?
Wall of Sound, yeah. Macintosh loves to talk about it, but that was John Mayer.
Yeah.
And John Mayer was a 24-year-old audio freak like myself, but he had an engineering background. And now Meyer Sound is one of the biggest professional companies in the world. They actually did the PA for the Bird's Nest Stadium in China.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, and he just started out in a little shop in Berkeley. So it was a great time. I sometimes refer to myself as the kind of Forrest Gump of audio, because you know that movie he just happened to be where all these things happened, and I just kind of happened to be around it. And like I said, I really feel fortunate by it.
Now, sometimes when I watch, and by the way, I'm completely fascinated with that exact same time period. I was not born until much later, but I often thought, like, what is the deal with this particular time period? And I think, like we said, it's very much tied in with the technological blank canvas that they were just starting to paint. But what I wanted to ask you was, sometimes when I hear people talking about specific geographic areas where these hotspots flared up in terms of creative, was there one for you in New York? Because I feel like Dylan was talking about Greenwich Village in those documentaries that I've seen. Like it was happening there. It was electric on the streets, and big things were going on in a small geographic area.
Yes.
Is that something that you're familiar with?
Yeah, I started, you know, the Bug, before I got to the Fillmore and everything, the Bug started out actually quite, you know, nothing quite intellectually based. Was when I grew up, it was 21 to drink in New Jersey, and it was 18 in New York. And I had a beard when I was 15. And so we used to take the train over to Greenwich Village to go see if we could go drink. And we wound up wandering into these places that are now legendary, called, you know, like the Gypsy in New York that Tom Rush and Bob Dylan would play at, and Cafe Wah. And you know, I remember seeing Hendrix sit in with some guys in a club. I mean, it was crazy. These were little bitty places, but it was kind of going on there. And then the Fillmore, one of the things that happened there was that Bill Graham wanted to start this concert hall, but he had no idea who the technical guys should be. And one of my mentors, a guy named Bob C., who started a company called C Factor, they saw an ad posted on the old theater, the Fillmore, before they reopened it, saying stage crew needed. And they were all in the theater program at NYU. So about 4 or 5 of them went down there and said, we could do this. And they basically built everything that happened in the Fillmore, then later turned into guys that ran the industry. Like Bob C. at C Factor. He passed away a few years ago, but C Factor does all the broadcast lighting and production for almost everything that comes in and out of New York. The Aerosmith tours that I did, Bob C. did all the lighting for it. So that was the first one for me. And then the second one was when Bill Graham is, most people know him best for his San Francisco stuff. There was the Fillmore West in San Francisco and Winterland and places like that. And basically, when I got off the David Bowie tour, I wound up in San Francisco. And that was another uber hotbed of...
What year was this?
73, probably. And that was, the Dead were there, and they were pushing the outside of the envelope on the audio, and so was John Mayer, and culturally, San Francisco was a very open city, so there were these hotbeds of stuff. Oddly enough, back then, Austin, Texas was a hotbed of music.
Now, are you saying that Austin, because I feel like it's still a hotbed now, are you saying that it went up and down?
It was then, too. Yeah. It was, a friend of mine makes a funny joke about Texas, about Austin. He says, Austin's the greatest place in the world for music. There's only one problem with it. It's surrounded by Texas. And my daughter actually lives in Austin now. And working for Willie Nelson and Waylon Jennings, they introduced me to Austin. Mm. And I'll tell you a funny story. I used to work for a band. It was a guitar player named John McLaughlin, and he had a very famous band back in there called the Mahavishnu Orchestra. And it was John McLaughlin, Billy Cobham on drums, John Schofield on guitar. It was the beginning of fusion jazz. Yeah. And I did a tour with him, and I saw on the date we were playing Austin, Texas. And I said, "They listen to this kind of stuff in Austin?" He goes, "Oh, yeah, Austin's like the bomb." And there was a 3,000-seat bar in Austin called the Armadillo World Headquarters. Oh. And everybody played there. And when I went there to play there the first time, we got there a night early because I wanted to go see the place. And we walk in, and Frank Zappa and his orchestra were playing. Oh. So you could see this kind of stuff all the time. But Austin, you could go to bars. And I remember in like 77... going to a bar called the Rome Inn and seeing Stevie Ray Vaughan with Double Trouble before he had an album, and just going, "Wow, what is this? This is blowing my mind." So, in fact, I was on a Bowie tour that went through there, and that's when Bowie saw Stevie Ray Vaughan in a bar and had him play on the Young Americans tour.
Oh, wow!
As his guitar player. So again, I'll repeat this a bunch. I was so fortunate to be involved in any of this. So that's kind of where I cut my teeth for 15 years, was on the road, doing the road stuff. And, I never invented anything or anything like that, but I was involved with, modern day concerts. People go and the PA and lights are hanging in the ceiling. Yeah. The reason they did that was not for sonic reasons. They did that so they could sell more seats, because arenas are ovals. So if you stack a PA, you knock out all these seats. Well, I was on the first tour where we had to figure out how to hang 2 tons of PA in the ceiling. Yeah. And we had aircraft straps, and shit was falling out. And I mean, it was crazy, But it was that inventing the touring industry that I'm so glad I was a part of. So,
do you have your shoe full of brown M&Ms story from any of the artists? You can even say, if you don't want to get...
Well, no.
You don't have to say their name. Just say, this crazy thing happened, and this is my one...
Well, there's an explanation on the M&M thing, okay? Because that was Aerosmith, and I did 5 Aerosmith tours. I did from Toys in the Attic, Rocks, that period, Walk This Way, all that stuff. And the reason that was done, that wasn't done by the band. That was done. Every band has they call it a rider. Yeah. And you hand it in. It's what you require, okay, for the dressing rooms and everything else. What most people don't realize is you're stuck in a coliseum in concrete brick-walled rooms. There's nothing there. So you got the bus or the inside. So you got to have your stuff there. And you're there 19 hours doing a show. So they feed you and everything else. But the guy, BJ, that ran the dressing room thing, he took care of all that, and the rider was the way he made sure that the promoter paid attention to the rider was, he said the band needed a glass bowl of M&Ms, no brown ones. So when he walked in, if there was a bowl in there with no brown ones, he knew they read the rider.
Well, was it common for them to disregard the rider?
Oh yeah, promoters were pretty sketchy folks back then. They weren't. There was a kind of a promoter in every town, and they were usually guys that were just trying to make a buck. And if you think about it, producing large scale rock and roll concerts is pretty risky business.
Yeah. And I would say dangerous too. Like if they made a mistake somehow, like a light could fall or something.
yeah.
If a detail is overlooked, there are physical things that could fall on the audience. I just say
absolutely.
from that alone.
Well, and there's a very famous Rod Stewart tour where the truss fell and killed a kid. And then a couple of years ago, heavy winds came up at a state fair in Missouri, and I think it was Garth Brooks or somebody, Keith Urban or one of those guys, blew the truss, blew like a half ton of lighting truss down. So yeah, you have to be very careful, and that's the other thing is when I decided to get off the road, I got married young, 23. I'm amazed my wife stayed with me. I stayed on the road till I was 30. We had our first kid, and I wanted to get off the road. Now, from the time I was 19 years old till that point, I had more responsibility than any 19-year-old in the world. I was putting up David Bowie tours, and traveling around the world with him. And what most people don't understand is all that stuff you see in the hall, we take out of the truck in the morning, set it all up, test it, do a show, put it all back in the truck. David Bowie tour was like a 10-truck show. So you work your ass off. You have a huge amount of responsibility. It's not like just a bunch of guys doing drugs. So some of the hardest working people I've ever met in my life were road guys, and they did it out of love. We made decent money, but in the early days, it really wasn't about the money. It wasn't, so the promoters were kind of sketchy. So we used to deal with the promoters. Now, like one promoter does the entire western third of the country. One does the entire middle of the country. So it's much more corporate now. Like back then, we never had the Rolling Stones as presented by Budweiser.
Yeah.
It was the last thing they would do would take a corporate sponsor, but that's commonplace now.
Yeah.
So, but the business is refined so much now. But when I came off the road, if I wrote a resume of what I've been doing for the last 14 years, most companies would think I was a drug addict.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you followed the bands. What are you, groupie or something? It's like they didn't get it. But the responsibility I had of dragging a crew of 30 people all over the world and getting to show up and down every day and sometimes doing 4 a week was way more responsibility than most people have in their 40s.
Yeah.
So I'm glad I did it because the work ethic that I have, it comes from that,
But there came a time though when you kind of felt like you were done with it. I'm assuming that the life itself is uniquely surprising, but also uniquely taxing in that.
Oh yeah, very much so. I mean, it's when we had our first child, I was like, I'm done. I got to get off the road, and the last thing I wanted to be was that legendary roadie who died in a hotel room in Arizona. It's just I didn't want to be that guy. And that's where the funny part of it starts. Is the first job I got out of when I came off the road was selling Peterbilt trucks. And the reason I got that job was the guy I used to lease all the trucks from for the tour. I was talking to him. We were about the same age. And I was talking to him saying, I'm going to get off the road, but I don't know what to do. And he said to me, well, if you can haul all these people around and deal with the union people all the time, he said, you can probably sell something for a living. I said, well, I never thought of that, So they sent me to school in Nashville where Peterbilts are built. And Peterbilt tractor trailers are like $100,000 a piece.
Yeah.
So I went to work for him, and I became the number one junior Peterbilt salesman in the country in like 8 months because I was just good at it. And but I hated it. I had nothing. I had no passion for it at all. It was terrible. And I was mostly selling trucks to guys in New Jersey that were hauling garbage to Ohio because they closed all the landfills. There was nothing passionate or romantic about this at all.
There's not a whole lot of sexy in that.
Yeah. So I read in the Daily News one day in New York that there was going to be this stereophile show. Okay. And I said, well, I'm into audio, and then maybe we should go to this. My wife and I will go to this. So we went in. It was in, I can't remember the hotel. It was right across from Madison Square Garden. And it was my first encounter with what we would call high-end audio, which was very hobbyist back then. I mean, extremely. And I remember my wife and I walked in the lobby, and we saw all these guys walking around with these leather extenders on their ears. And we were like, what is going on? You know, because me coming from the world of pro audio, which is very pragmatic, and you treat things like tools, this whole crazy high-end audio thing was like weird. And these guys were wearing these. It's like putting your hands up behind your ears.
You're saying they're like it's something that goes extends the length of your ear?
Right. And somebody in the lobby was selling them for like $50 a pair. And I can remember saying, what the hell is going on?
Oh, I feel like I need to research that, dude.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't remember what they called them, but and I said to a guy, well, you know, if you put your hands here, it does sound different, but it's not right.
Yeah, it's not bad.
You know, but it was my first kind of, you know, encounter with this. And I went up to a couple of the dealers, and I was looking at the stuff, and I was like, I got my audio bug came back, and I was just, you know, well, this is pretty cool stuff. And I was looking at brands like Audio Research and early Mark Levinson and stuff like that. And I ran into a dealer that was showing there, and he had, I guess, I didn't know because I didn't know the world of high end was. It was a store's name was Sound by Singer, and it was one of the most famous high end stores in the world. So I sat down and I talked to Andy Singer, and I told him my story, and I said, you know, I think I want to, maybe you should hire me. And he says to me, well, you know, I don't, and anybody that listens to this that's ever known Andy knows how Andy is. And he said to me, you know a lot, but you don't know anything about high end, so I don't know if you're going to be good or suck. So I tell you what, everybody else gets a salary in my store. I'm going to give you a draw of $400 a week and 6% of whatever you sell on a commission. I said, okay, fine. So I was going to go to work for him the next week, and I got home, and I said to my wife goes, so do you think that's enough money? I go, I don't even know what it means. I didn't know what 6% of what I sold as long as it was above cost or yada, yada, yada. So long story short, I go to work for him, and it was funny because, just so you guys know, the crew at Sound by Singer back then was me, Steve Gutenberg, Mike Trey, and a whole bunch of guys that are all like writers and reviewers now and stuff. So it was a great group of people. Steve Gutenberg helped me understand what high-end was about. But it might have been beginner's luck, or I don't know what it was. But after the first month, Andy said to me, what do I owe you? And I said, well, you owe me $33,000. And he was like, well, I sold everybody who walked in the door. And what had happened was I went to 2 other New York audio stores just to see how they sold things. So my story was I'm going to buy a CD player, speakers, and an integrated amp. What should I buy? And one store gave me a 3-hour turntable demo, just completely ignored what I was saying. Mm-hmm. And the other store told me I didn't know shit and I wasn't willing to spend enough and get out. So my wife said to me, how are you going to start this sales thing? I go, I think I'm just going to listen to people and then get them what they need. Because these other stores made me feel like an idiot, you know? And that's what I did. I was selling stuff like crazy, you know? And so I worked in New York for about a year. Now I'd started meeting all these manufacturers, and some of them knew my name from Pro Audio, and they said, what are you doing working in a store? And so Nelson Pass, who's one of the most famous guys in high-end, hired me to be the sales manager for Threshold. Wow. Back in the day. And I moved to Sacramento, where Threshold was, and started working for them. And that's how my audio manufacturing career started.
Oh, I had no idea.
Yeah, that's kind of where how I got into this side of it.
And
so
and how long ago was that? Like, how long have you been doing it for?
I think this is my 29th CES. So wow. Yeah, a long time.
And how's it look compared to back then? The high-end audio.
Oh, it's been up and down its whole life. It's
really
when I first started showing here with high end. Well, the first time I came as working for Singer. I came as a dealer looking at products, and at that time, the high end was in this old hotel in town here called the Jockey Club. And it was a nasty little place.
I've never heard of that.
Oh, they blew it up years ago.
This one that they demo.
Yeah, oh, yeah. But then we got thrown out of there because the hotel didn't like the fact that we took all the beds out and we changed the furniture around. We put acoustic treatment up. And then for the next 8 or 9 years, it was in the Sahara before they renovated it. Next to the Sahara was like a motor lodge, 2-story kind of rooms. And it was called the Sahara Bi-Level. And that's where high-end was for about 8 or 9 years. But literally, you would throw the light switch on in the morning and the cockroaches would run across the floor.
So the high-end
it was
section
lame.
has never been by the convention center. It's always been like the gutted hotel.
It's always tried to be a separate place because we needed to make sound. And you can't make good sound in a convention center.
So with all that with all that experience, what do you think is happening now? Because for those who don't know, high-end audio is, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but it appears this year it's down to one floor of the Venetian.
Yeah, I think this show for high-end or headphone is over for me. I'm not going to come back. I may come back to look around, but this show has turned more into televisions, computers, cameras. CES has done a great job trying to give us a venue, but I think the show has morphed away from what we are. And if you think about it, this is the worst time of year for a retailer to leave his business. It's just after Christmas, that type of thing. So it's crazy, They used to have 2 CESs. There was one, this one at this time, and then there was one at the end of May in Chicago. It was called Summer CES. And we all really loved it because Chicago's such a great town. And they had some good venues there, but the union costs got out of line there, and they drove it out of there. So, but now with the advent of the regional shows and one thing we should probably talk about is how I decided to leave strict high-end audio and put all my resources into the development of the headphone market. That was
that was a conscious choice.
That was a huge change in my life. It was I just run a company called NHT, which made great reasonably priced loudspeakers out of San Francisco. They ran into some money problems, sold the company. And I had known Noli from Monster Cable for a long time, and I ran into him at a 49ers game in San Francisco. And he said to me, well, what are you doing now? And I said, well, I've just left NHT. I'm not sure what I'm going to do. He goes, I got this headphone thing going. You should come and work for me. Because I'd known him for years. So I was part of the Beats team from the beginning.
Really?
Yeah. So, and, the head file guys like to, when people would say that on a panel, and I'd go, yeah, Beats. Ooh. But Beats broke the headphone market open. When we first started selling Beats, and first of all, let's get it out of the way right now. Beats don't sound awful. They just don't sound great. But they introduced what a better headphone plugging into your iPhone or your iPod could do.
Yeah, I mean, I recently saw their documentary. They have, I don't know if you've seen it on HBO.
Yeah.
Those guys, and in one specific part, the guy said it's about the bass. There wasn't a really emphasis for acuity in the mids or smooth, non-fatiguing treble. It was, this headphone is about the bass. We're making it bigger.
Well, it wasn't really that. And I will tell you for sure, there's been all these stories about who developed Beats, who didn't develop Beats, who did this, who did that. Because everybody wants to jump in on one of the biggest success stories in the world, and Beats was certainly that. Yeah. But Dr. Dre voiced the headphone. Monster was doing the development. We would send him down samples, and he would listen in his studio, and he told us what he wanted. And if you think about it, in the genre he works in, it's that high mid bump. That's part of the music. It's part of that art, and it logically made sense the way he wanted it to sound. And Monster did do the development on it and did do the heavy leg lift on it. Also got it into distribution. But Beats, for a guy like me at my age now, I look back at Beats and I was glad I was part of it because it was one of the most right time, right place, right people product in the world. And I'll tell you a funny story. We just got the first pre-prototypes in. And Jimmy Iovine, who's Interscope and all that, calls up to Monster and he says, I need 50 pair in Burbank this afternoon. And Monster's like, well, we can't do that. Finally, he sent a plane up, his plane. They flew him down, and they gifted USA Basketball as they were going to China. So LeBron, Kobe, all these guys. So 2 days later, I'm watching ESPN, and they're doing an interview with LeBron and Kobe from their workout in Beijing, and they both got beads around their neck. And they do the interview, and I'm just happy they have them around their neck. And then the interviewer goes, hey, those are nice cans. What are those? And LeBron and Kobe launch into like 3 minutes on these are beats by Dr. Dre, by Monster. They're the best thing in the world, yada, yada, yada. And I'm going, oh, my God, I didn't pay a dime for that. And that stuff, because of Jimmy Iovine and Dre, just continued to happen. So the marketing that happened for free on beats because of Iovine, at the time, Interscope was the only record company making money. And if you think about it, they had U2, they had Gaga, they had Dre, they had No Doubt, they had, the only artists that were making money, M&M, So it was just this perfect storm of culturally the right time for it. The iPod was slamming, and it just took off and went from 0 to 200 million in less than a year. Yeah. So I was glad to be a part of it, and after that, I wanted to leave Monster and branch out because I always have an affinity for these smaller companies. And George Cardist asked me to help him get a headphone in the market, and once I did George's, that's where I went from there, and I made a conscious choice that I'm going to work for headphone companies from now on, and I was president of Jerry Harvey Audio, and now with HiFiMAN, so I love it, and to me, reminds me of high-end when I first got into it. A lot of guys just innovating and doing cool things and on a shoestring and trying to grow the companies and a community thing. And I really dug the head-fi thing. I met Jude, and I just said, this is way more fun than high-end at this point. So I consciously made that choice, yeah.
Do you, given that kind of choice that you made, where do you feel like the two-channel as a whole is going? There's so much conversation around the rub between two-channel and headphones and how they're different, and one of the questions is, will headphones save two-channel? Is two-channel dying? Does it need to be saved? Could headphones save it?
I don't really look at it that way. To me, I got into this because of the music. So the important part for me, and don't get me wrong, I love gear. I mean, if I probably sold everything I have in closets at home, I'd be a rich man, but I won't because it's gear. And but I don't think there's any correlation between one saving the other. I like the fact, like when iPod came out, the high end railed against it. Oh, it's MP3, it's terrible, it's this, that. I loved it because since the death of the Walkman, hi-fi became a destination thing that cut young people out of it, So all of a sudden, here was the opportunity for people to listen to music again. I think it was a renaissance in people listening to music. I worked for Meridian Audio, and Bob Stewart had invented a new encoding scheme, and we were in competition to become the encoding scheme for DVD audio. Okay. So I was at all those meetings trying to make it a format and da-da-da. And we just got it going, and we were working with Warner Brothers and remixing Doors records and stuff into multi-channel and that kind of thing, and Napster happened, right? Half the guys I worked with at Warner got fired. They were gone. And the record industry went into a collapse that was their own fault. So record sales stopped. Why are people getting everything for free? How do we control this? How do we do this? How do we do that? And when the iPod came out, it kind of got them out of that hole for a second because Apple said, well, here's a great deal. You got this little thing. You can put all your music out. You can buy it from us. And if you remember, the original thing was you didn't have to buy the whole record. You could buy one song at a time. Right. Well, that went by the wayside really fast. You know, you can't buy the new YouTube song, one song. You have to buy the record. Yeah. Okay? But that was the start of it coming back. But high end always eats its young. Okay? So it rails against anything new that comes in for a while. And then when it decides to wrap its arms around it, it does a good job. You know, so they did the same thing with MP3 and iPod. They did the same thing when the headphone guys started to encroach. You know, now everybody has a headphone. You know, NAD, who is a receiver company. I remember talking to those guys going, headphones, and there's the limited market, da-da-da-da. Now, I hear right next door to us, they have 4 new headphones. You know, so everybody jumped back into headphones. I just thought the headphone thing was so cool because the barrier to entry was so small. Mm-hmm. So a college kid could get a decent headphone for $200 and play his music and, you know, and that kind of thing. But I think what's going on now is high-end got itself priced out of the marketplace because what really sells for these companies, the big stuff, is the crazy big stuff. Mm-hmm. And you only have to sell so many of them because many high-end companies, that guy just wanted to maintain his lifestyle.
Yeah.
So if you sold $600,000 loudspeakers a year, that's fun. You're done. Yeah. You know, but it took it away from the mainstream people. Like people couldn't afford it. Mm-hmm. Now what I see, and I think the headphone market spurred this, was I see designers designing uber high performance stuff for way less money. Like a perfect example is Andrew Jones is one of my favorite speaker designers. He was, with TAD, made $30,000, $60,000 loudspeakers. He was a KEF for years. He's a pioneer in the industry. And basically, he goes to ELAC, and the first thing he puts out is a $500 set of bookshelves, and they blew me away. Now he's got a tower speaker for $5,000 that sounds as good as any $10,000 loudspeaker to me. So I think there's a trend now. Mm-hmm. Audio Engine, I think, proved that if you gave decent product at a decent price that worked well, they do well. And I think Audio Engine did really well. You know, the KEF UniQ, the little one, at $400. Unbelievable. So I think the headphone industry is pushing the designers to look at that barrier to entry, which is really important because not everybody can buy a Wilson. You know, so...
So where do you kind of think that the future of music listening is going? What direction?
Well, you know, it's I think it's a really bright future. And before I came to HiFiMAN, I after being at a pro for 25 years, I took a job being president of JH Audio. And, you know, JH Audio, audiophiles know the name, but most of JH's business is the large-scale touring market. So I did in-ear monitors for, 85% of the large-scale touring market, U2, Rolling Stones, Lady Gaga, Justin Timberlake, all of those guys. So I got back into live music for a while, and that refreshed me. I couldn't believe how much I missed it, and what it did. It kind of brought those passions up for me again. And dealing with the artists was great. And one of the things, the messages I've always had for the high-end guys is they have all these ideas about how music is recorded, and they don't know.
I know.
They have no idea.
Oh, my God, it's so true.
Yeah. And so people would say to me well, why would JH be a great in-ear to buy? And I said, well, you have to look at it from the fact that since we do all these large-scale bands and we don't give the stuff away, they choose that particular headphone. Now, wouldn't you want to use the headphone that was the choice of the exact people that were creating the music that you wanted to listen to? The other part was turning those guys onto higher-end audio products, which they've never seen. Every night when they mix the show down, they mix the show down so the band can hear it later. They would mix it down in 24-192 on a Pro Tools rig, dump it to MP3, and put it on the band's phones. So I put together a deal with Sony where we gave the U2 audio guys and the Stones audio guys, Guns N' Roses, all these guys, we gave them the big Sony Walkman players. Yeah. And they could dump it down in 24-192. Yeah. And it blew their minds. So a lot of them still call me and say, I'm going to buy an over-ear set of headphones. What should I get? And I'll tell them about the HiFiMAN, or I'll tell them about Dan Clark's stuff, or Mr. Speakers. And to them, they have no idea that this stuff exists, you know. And so watching them get excited about it, and then kind of watching people get excited about music again, because the record industry has turned over, right? They no longer make any money on the record. Years ago, you made all your money on the record, and you toured to sell the record. Now, bands tour to make money because you don't make any money on the record. Yeah. So the Rolling Stones tour 3 times a year now. They used to tour once every 5 years. So there's more music everywhere now. So there's music everywhere you go. And my life's goal is to give people gear that they can hear that and enjoy it. And one thing that I used to tell friends is, you know, when rap happened, it was like everybody, oh, rap, that's not music, that's terrible, that's, you know, oh, it's terrible stuff. And my take has always been, because when you're a professional road guy, you work for whoever hires you. Yeah. So I did Parliament Funkadelics, I did the OJs, I did 6 of the first Sex Pistol shows in the United States. I did country, I did hard rock. And the thing that I came to see was watching the audiences was, there's no such thing as bad music. If somebody enjoys it and it makes somebody tap their foot and elevate their spirit or recall something great in their life, it's all good. It's all good. And that's what I wish the industry would, you know, kind of stop kind of fighting with one another, and just the common goal is the music. Mm-hmm. And with the way the world is now, you know, because you know me, I travel 300,000 miles a year. I'm in Asia all the time, and I'm in Europe and Russia, and I don't want to sound like I'm answering a question from the Miss America pageant, but music is going to save all of us, going to save all our asses, okay? It's the universal language of all time. It's what we can all relate to. I remember being in Moscow and standing in Red Square, and I had an open back set of phones on playing Back in Black, and 20 Russian guys came by and went, Back in Black, yeah, really cool. And I mean, what else does that? Nothing. Yeah. No politics, no TV, no nothing. Music does it. So the future of music is as bright as it's ever been. And I would suggest to anybody that hasn't put on a pair of good cans in a while, and, you know, there's a big move on to people learn how to meditate. Yeah, just put some music on, lay back on the couch, and forget about this bullshit world. I'm out, dude.
You didn't like it?
It's disgrace and an embarrassment.
Oh no, really? You're one of those?
Okay, so you tell me
I loved it.
You liked to see Luke Skywalker sucking on the breast of a dinosaur?
That was hilarious. I liked.
It was not.
He walked out and he just dusted off his shoulder. Like, that's all you got, bitch. I was like, yeah. Dude, it was awesome. The middle, the horse racing, whatever, alien horse racing. Could have done without that. The whole thing where they went to that one casino planet was pretty lame. But
he's a busy man. You know, he can't. He's always his phone's blowing up. Hold on one second.